our population was focused on people with physical disabilities and those that are deaf or blind. In the media, the way different disabilities are portrayed in popular media has an immense effect on how the rest of society views them. Media has a big impact either for the good or bad. There are many movies that have based their plot line on disability. Some new and popular ones include A Quiet Place and Wonder. In A Quiet Place, the disability population portrayed is the deaf. All actors had to learn sign language, and it brought the deaf community to the limelight, and the deaf community received it well. There are some issues how the cochlear implant was used, and that it was used incorrectly. This caused some issues, but also caused discussion, which led to education. In Wonder, a young boy had facial deformities, and he was going to a new school. This movie brought a lot of attention to children getting bullied for physical differences. It had a positive impact, and a lot of schools were playing it in their classroom to help teach kids about bullying. In media, disabilities can be the whole character. They don't really have any other role other than displaying that disability. Karen Chong, who is the Director of Audience and Influencer Engagement at AARP, states, "Disability need to stop being punchlines for characters. This sometimes puts unwanted pity on these populations. Media can help with the exposure of people with disabilities, but the education may not always be correct." With family support, when someone is deaf, blind, or physically disabled, they need help in a lot of areas, some being activities of daily living. This can be a big undertaking for family because it can be very time consuming helping someone with most of their activities. Taking on this new role for a family is often necessary but can lead to frustration, conflict, and stress. Even though this role is overwhelming for most families, it can bring them closer. The roles family members who have a disabled member include being a caregiver, providing comfort, being an advocate, being a listener, and providing support. With these roles, the disabled member will hopefully feel supported, understood, and helped. With roles of peers, friendships are valuable for everyone but play a specific role for people who have disabilities. Having a disability can make someone feel different from their peers. Peers can create a fun and stress-free environment, provide support, provide social interaction, and provide emotional support. Peers can create a safe and fun environment with someone with a disability, but they can also be destructive, enabling, and cause stress on the person. With bullying and low self-esteem can lead to depression. This can get better or worse with peers and their influence. Depression in persons with disability may be more common than in the general population. With the increased risk for depression causes a decrease in health outcomes. The power of peers have a big influence on a person, which then has a big impact on their health outcomes. There is a cyclical nature to disabilities such as the visual, hearing, or physical impairments. The first way it is cyclical is because of genetics. Many diseases or disorders that cause being visually impaired, deaf, or have a physical disability have a genetic component, meaning the parents had it, which then got passed down to their kids, and it will then pass down to their kids, making this an ongoing process. Being visually impaired, deaf, or having physical disabilities is usually a chronic diagnosis. These impairments will be ongoing and can only get worse. Because of this, there will need to be an ongoing way to cope. There will be different times in people's lives with disabilities that will be more difficult than other times. So more coping will be needed at certain times compared to others. All these disabilities have a cyclical nature. The ADA, American Disabilities Act, was put into place to protect the rights of people with disabilities. It guarantees these people have equal opportunities to public accommodations, jobs, transportation, government services, telecommunications. By having these in place, a person who is visually, hearing, or physically impaired have their rights protected. Each state must abide by these laws, and it is required to have special accommodations for these populations. Accommodations include providing handicapped parking spots, modifying equipment, modifying work schedules, assisted computer software, allowing service animals, and so much more. Because of these laws that were made by our legal system, people who have disabilities have the same rights and opportunities as someone without disabilities. According to Ismail et al., one unique barrier that may not be commonly considered is available clothing, which may impact the disabled person's ability and/or desire to take part in certain activities. Depending on how clothing is designed may impact those with, say, physical disabilities if it is formed or fastened in a way that they either cannot manage at all or can't without help. According to ASL interpreters, there are noticeable gaps between hearing and deaf culture, some having to do with appropriate ways to communicate or interpretive resources within the community when such services are performed by volunteers. There are also some old-school positions that discourage ASL instruction, feeling it negatively impacts the ability to integrate by learning to read lips. The Museum of Disability History acknowledges a few myths about ability, one being that physical one automatically insinuates an intellectual one. In all the areas listed above, China, Latin America, Greece, and the Middle East, and among others, the importance of saving face as an individual or family, independence, and other cultural or religious beliefs common to the area can impact feelings and actions towards those with disabilities. At times, they may be shunned, neglected, or undergo unhelpful interventions. According to Cornell University, only 39% of the deaf population, 30.5% of those visually impaired, and 16% of those with ambulatory impairment had full-time employment. In a related 2019 NPR article, interviews of deaf citizens paint a picture of very poor emotional health, accumulation of debt, and lack of sufficient employment to meet needs. Some accumulate thousands of dollars of student debt, trying to earn higher degrees as a way to make themselves more marketable for entry-level positions, in spite of their disability. They are also impacted by the availability of sufficient accommodations to allow them optimal functioning in interviews or on the job. One example given was that a translator may be available, but are often randomly assigned, and are less helpful with little knowledge regarding the content being discussed. Health outcomes can be impacted by traditions and cultures commonly associated with a certain race, ethnicity, or religion that the individuals come from or predominantly reside in. Examples would be how the belief of karma in Buddhism may be used to explain the cause of punishment for something they or a parent did, or attaching cultural labels of diseased or worthless. Other cultures may consider them the result of bad blood, a curse, the evil eye, or punishment for wrongdoing. Coping strategies of caregivers may be harmful to the physically disabled individual and may result in delays in medical care due to concealment. Physical outcomes of these diseases are not necessarily changed due to gender. If a man is blind, then a woman will, for the most part, have the same physical visual impairments. What does change is the emotional and mental reactions. It is secondary behaviors that stem from the impairment that cause a change in health outcomes. In a study done, statistics revealed overall that men were at higher risk for destructive health outcomes. Men had a harder time adjusting to a disability, especially when aging was combined with the disability. This led them to drink more alcohol and be at higher risk for self-harming behaviors. Women, on the other hand, had higher incidence of anxiety that was associated with the disability. They were more likely to involve themselves with a healthier diet and an active lifestyle. As with everything, there are exceptions to this study. Overall, they found both genders are at risk for depression, but it seemed to be higher in males. It is important to assess health with this population to make sure health outcomes are not affected. Individuals with physical, visual, and auditory disabilities may require assistance to get to and from appointments. Unfortunately, some disabled individuals have somewhat restricted freedom. This can become a major barrier to those living in a rural geographical region. Typically, rural areas do not have access to healthcare like urban areas do. Making doctor's appointments can be difficult, time-consuming, and exhausting. This is why telehealth is such a welcoming form of technology. For those who are disabled that live in rural communities, telehealth can be a difference between an individual receiving care instead of neglecting their care due to the difficulties of commuting. Telehealth provides the opportunity for patients to have better health outcomes by taking away the barriers of a geographical location. First off, to understand this, it's important to understand what implicit and explicit bias is. When someone feels implicit bias, they are struggling with inner feelings. Explicit bias can be more dangerous because people feel threatened by a certain group. These reactions can go past inner feelings and cause danger to the group. When it comes to people with physical, auditory, and visual disabilities, research has shown that implicit biases are more common with this group. Through testing, participants' results revealed they were uncomfortable around those with disabilities and that they preferred able-bodied individuals. This is what causes people to stare when they see something that doesn't seem normal. When not knowing what to do, they may tend to stare. It is important that these implicit biases are addressed so that those with disabilities can seamlessly become part of society. No matter where an individual lives, these disabilities will influence health. Visual, auditory, and physical impairments affect health outcomes and make it more difficult to care for themselves. Although everyone is affected, there are places that may struggle more than others. We can see this in third world countries or underdeveloped countries. In these countries, roads are not appropriately equipped to help those with disabilities to travel. These countries also do not have the healthcare that is advanced like other countries, nor do they have as many resources for equipment. These countries lack healthcare professionals like physical therapists, occupational therapists, and speech therapists. Because of this, it is much more likely that those suffering from disparities will have decreased health outcomes in these countries. In developed countries, these problems still exist, but at a lower scale. There are more resources in developed countries and quicker access to help. Although those with disabilities will still suffer more setbacks than those without, in developed countries, they are more likely to reach health goals through the resources offered.